Hello, everyone, and welcome to another edition of the American Scouser TV Fantasy Premier League Show. I will be by myself tonight as Matush had a work event that he had to attend. So we'll be taking you through a little bit of a recap of last week, a look forward to the next few matches, a little bit of talks about some transfers, and of course, I'm sure there'll be a few bad predictions and ideas you should probably avoid. As always, if you are watching live on YouTube, Twitter, or X, please jump in and give us a comment if you have a question, whether it be something about the program or something about your side or something you'd like answered on something coming up regarding Fantasy Premier League. Let us know. We would love to hear from you. So let's start like we always do with a quick look at our current existing standings. And we have some real honorable mentions here. As many of you know, we run this American Scouser Cup. It's a traditional style league on points alone. We've just our second year doing it. And a big shout out right now in the top 10, fellow contributor and Thursday night podcast alum, Trevor Utley, currently in 10th place with 808 points, sitting just inside the top 200,000 at about 185. Sad to say, not myself, but Kelly Gallivan, my wife, is currently ninth overall at 808 points as well, and she sits around 182,000. Fourth, Scott Fishkin, another contributor and long-standing friend here of the programs and fellow Thursday night alum on the podcast, is sitting in fourth place at 820 points, just inside the top 100,000 at just around 93K, which is really, really impressive at this time. But they're all chasing Cade Nicholson, our first place runaway leader at this moment, with a 10-point lead on the second place person, currently inside the top 10,000 at 7,761st on 851 points. So really great job by Cade. Congratulations. As always, we always extend the option for anyone who's in first place to come on the program. If you know Cade, let him know. Best bet is probably avoid it and continue upward and onward. And I hope you can continue to climb the standings as we move forward. Let's take a look at last week's Team of the Week. There isn't going to be much that we talk about here because, to be totally honest, outside of maybe Gordon as a differential and knowing that they've got some injury problems, I can't see many of these players being inside really solid starting 11s at this point. Maybe some João Pedro folks who just haven't played in the last 10 game weeks, so they just still have João Pedro starting. But this is a really funky week in week 13. You know, obviously Tavernier for Bournemouth, Kluivert for Bournemouth, 2 big weeks. That's a killer for anyone who owned Dominic Solanke and saw them score all those goals. Gordon, like I mentioned, Willian with the 2 penalties. Gary O'Neill still probably wondering why people were rewarded for bad VAR decisions. But that happens every once in a while. Jamie joins in with a comment here. No Matus probably got called back for offside, just like his captain's son. I will say, we're going to get to some of the pains of last week, but Jamie, you are right. Man, it was tough. My wife had Son on her team last week, and she got really excited 2 or 3 times. And by the end, I realized that he basically had a hat trick of offsides. And I think he also missed about 3 sitters. And Son's going to be a topic of conversation as we progress here with the show a little bit, because it's one of those big questions. Do you stick with a guy like Son? We all know he can score. He can put up 20 points on any given match. He is their match winner. They don't have a great run of fixtures, and it looks like Madison could be out till the new year, and he was really creating an awful lot. So it's going to be interesting to see what Son owners do, especially when there's so much more value at the midfield positions. So Before we look at some of the transfers in and out, I thought we would take a look at something the Fantasy Football Scout UK puts out, which is the overall fixture ticker. What I like about this tool is it allows you to sort it based on 3 weeks, 5 weeks, 10 weeks, however many weeks you want to kind of make your game plan. But it also really helps with looking at the difference between attack and defense or just overall. So this is a overall outlook on the best fixtures from a fantasy standpoint as far as the algorithms are out there looking at. And I did it over the next 6 game weeks specifically because I think now's about the time a lot of people have to start to worry or at least think about how they'll navigate match week 18 when we'll have the blank match week, especially with Man City assets. So when you look at this chart, it talks pretty clearly that you have Newcastle, Liverpool, Bournemouth, all at the top of the table as far as the overall fixtures go. I think it's clear to me why Newcastle and Liverpool are there. The fixtures line up well, especially home matches. Liverpool does have United and Arsenal in here, but also, Fulham and Burnley, Crystal Palace, and Sheffield United. Those are all matches that you would think you would want to be investing into some of the Liverpool assets. Obviously, I think Mo Salah is the one that most players have targeted. And I think the others is kind of that struggle is, do you go for a central defender like Van Dijk that's guaranteed minutes? Do you gamble with a Darwin Nunez and go with the high upside, or maybe the little bit more minute driven in Luis Diaz at this point, especially after the news that Diego Jota will probably miss the remainder of this calendar year, or at least into the heavy period of the festive fixtures. So I think when you're making your transfers at this point, knowing that you have Europe on the line, knowing that you also have the League Cup fixtures coming back in, I think this is the time of year where you have to actually start to plan things out 2 to 3 weeks in advance and make sure you're not picking up a player for a week or two that picks up a knock or is injury prone or already flagged. To me, this is the time of year where the matches come thick and fast, and you actually have to have somewhat of a playing bench. So I'd really think that now's about the time where you start making strategic transfers. And I think when you have teams like Brentford and Man City, where folks have been invested in, I think you have to be careful about a blank match week like we have in 18. Jamie mentions, the busy Christmas period, and he's absolutely right. In addition to Christmas, we have quite a few of these teams still playing in another round of the Champions League, the Europa League, and the Europa Conference League, which we saw this week can really kind of mix and match and affect. So when you're making moves, you also have to think about how many of your players were playing. We talked about the teams here at the top. If we look some of the teams at the bottom, Tottenham, City, Everton, Palace, and then, of course, Luton and Villa. I kind of bring some of those guys up because I think when you look at Tottenham, it's a really, really tough time to have Tottenham assets. They're still scoring, and it still looks good on paper, whether it's Pedro Porro or Udogie. But I just think that between City, West Ham, and then Newcastle, even that Everton at home game has, a 0-0 kind of a stalemate draw written all over it. So I'm not in love with the Tottenham assets at the moment. City's got a tough run between Tottenham, Villa, and then they have the blank in 18. That's what clearly brings them to the bottom, or they would probably be middle to top of this table. And then you talk about Palace, Luton, and believe it or not, the last team on this list is Villa. Villa's had a great run for a while. They've been kind of the fantasy darling between Matty Cash and Ollie Watkins and Diaby. There have been all types of avenues into their attacking assets. Even Douglas Luiz has showed to be a good fantasy asset. They're not going to be a great run over the next 5 to 6 matches. So if you're a team like me that has 2 or 3 Villa players, I think we have to start thinking about how we kind of slowly get those players out. Uh, Jamie's all in on the comments tonight. Gives me a Kelleher in. Don't think I'll be making a transfer with a keeper, but I will say if it had been a long-term injury, I think it'd be a no-brainer if you were on a wild card or you had a double transfer move that you would free up funds by bringing in a Liverpool keeper at, that cheap of a price. But with the talks that it's only going to be probably 2 league matches, I think if you are sitting on Allison, in my opinion, you're way over investing in your goalkeeper. But even if you're not, I don't think a smart decision right now would be to make a transfer in for a player you're probably going to want to transfer out, because a lot of people will bring him in, especially those who don't care about the squad values, which will see his ownership levels go up, which means once he stops playing, his value will drop. So your $4 million asset will quickly become a $3,938,000 waste when you go ahead and run your wild card in the second half of the season, if you haven't already run your wild card already. So speaking of transfers, let's take a look at the teams that are the players that the most teams are transferring in. No real surprise here. Brian Mbeumo leads the list for Brentford. Good run of fixtures, great matchup this week. He does have the blank in match week 18, but I think at that price, you can probably navigate him being on your bench. It just becomes difficult if you have him on your bench and Holland on your bench, and you're trying to still put out a team that can maybe secure a green arrow in match week 18. So those bringing in Mbeumo have to think about that. Anthony Gordon's been on a great run of form, playing really well for Newcastle, also playing through the middle when Isak hasn't been available as a false 9. Interesting little bit of information there to see how Eddie Howe deploys him moving forward, especially with the news that Harvey Barnes is back in training. So you might see some limited minutes and eventual rotation with Gordon, especially with the fact that they're playing still in both the League Cup and, of course, that big fixture they'll have in the Champions League, where they hope to figure out a way to advance in the to the latter stages of the Champions League. Saka, here, I mean, this is a no-brainer for me. If you don't have Saka in, I understand why you're bringing him in this week. We'll talk about my team a little later and why I'm making that type of a move now. And I think he is fixture-proof at this point, Saka. He can start every match. He is on penalties. His goal scoring is a little bit down. He's creating more. But I think with Trossard playing well, Martinelli getting back to form, and now Jesus being back in the equation, I expect Saka to see his numbers continue to rise, as well as his numbers in his ownership. Zinchenko and Saliba, more Arsenal defenders. If it were me, I'd be bringing in Saliba. I would stay away from Zinchenko. I get nervous with the rotation that Arteta has at times, especially coming in and out of Europe. And Zinchenko seems to always get subbed off, and that always makes me worried as well with the defender. That's it for our transfers in this week. If we look at some of the outgoings, they're a little easier to understand. Bowen, Matoma, and Madison, all players that are flagged with injury. Madison out on the long term. Matoma sounds like he might be back shorter than was initially expected, a week or two. So I think some folks may be regretting that move, as Brighton's fixtures do look tasty throughout the holiday festive schedule. Bowen's an interesting one. I got to tell you, I held on to Bowen last week. I couldn't do it for 2 weeks in a row, especially hearing that he hadn't traveled or trained yet. Listen, we all know David Moyes is going to put Jared Bowen back into the lineup as soon as he possibly can. But again, with so much attacking talent available at the midfield position, it's hard to sit 7 to 7.5 million on the bench at this part of the season. So I understand why the injured players are on this list. I already kind of mentioned Son a little earlier, talking about Tottenham. I do think that Son is a tough player at 9'7" to justify his price tag. When you can bring in players like Saka and Odegaard, even Bruno Fernandes, you can even drop down to Raheem Sterling. You're looking at players that are actually delivering just as well in the fantasy world as well as in the underlying statistics. So I really think that at this point, Son is more of a luxury play. Um, it's just that you really love having that player because you know that he can take over a game at any moment. And if he is on his day, he is a match winner and he can win you fantasy points and fantasy leagues, to be honest, because he's the type of differential. If you're smart enough and gutsy enough to captain Son on his day, it can really move the needle. I think Alvarez is, he's gone off the boil here, hasn't scored in 4 or 5, hasn't assisted in 3. The thing about Alvarez is not only is he probably the first player that will be rotated out, in my opinion, of the starting 4 at this point, he also has the blank match week coming up in 18. So I think he's just getting a little bit. I think his transfer numbers has more to do with the other options available at forward and their prices than it does people not having faith in Julian Alvarez as a fantasy option at this point. So as we always do when we go through, we look at our teams. We usually talk them out loud, what we did, how the week worked out for us. Matoush is not here tonight, but we will take a look at his team. The last few weeks, it has been my team first because we always lead with whoever is trailing in the overall standings. But I had the fortunes of a slight leapfrog this week. So we will start here with Matoush's team. Matoush was on a red arrow this week, so not something that he was looking for going in. Did not reach the safety number of 50, fell a few points short at 45. Didn't really leave anything too heavy on his bench, a point or two here or there. Probably the big frustrations, I would assume, lied with the Crystal Palace not handling the clean sheet, Cole Palmer, and, of course, the fact that he just went in the wrong direction with his captain. It's always hard when you have a guy like Salah and you actually drop in your ranking because so many other folks captained him and you didn't. And that's one of the frustrating things about how the game works sometimes with the captaincy and the armbands. But Matoush made the great move to bring in Gordon a while back. It's really paying off for him. Obviously, he's living and dying in the world of not having Haaland and spreading out that money. But as we kind of talked about earlier in the program, when referring to Son, it might be one of those times where you have to kind of look at the side and say to yourself, like, is it really making this much sense to have this much money invested in my back line and that much money invested in a midfielder that is scoring more like a $6.5 to $8 million player, not a $10 million player? And I'm not sure how much longer you can go without Haaland and not worrying about where that might leave the overall standing of this team when it runs through this busy festive period. And I just think that, Trippier and Trent at one point was wow, if you can fit both those guys in your side. And you can see how he did it. He had to really spread out the money. He's got 2 budget midfielders, 2 premiums, and a mid. He's got 3 strikers, all in the middle range, maybe Watkins on the upper end, and then some enablers filling out the roster. And I just think there's better ways to spend this money. I know Trent got the goal, but until Liverpool proves that they can keep consistent clean sheets and he's going to get consistent attacking returns, it's hard to stump up $8 million on a player who's actually got the output of, a mid-tier defender at this point, fantasy-wise. So I do think if, Matoush were here, we'd probably argue a little bit about these things. But I do think he's got a little bit of squad reconstruction to do here. Hopefully he's able to pull that off, and he has a great week, and it leads to a massive green arrow. Well, Speaking of a player who wasn't able to get to a green arrow, I too dropped last week, fell in the standings. Just inside the top 400,000. Hoped I would have a much better week than this. Expected to have a much better week than this. Um, Ultimately, here when it comes down to my team, just really the moves I've made just haven't worked out for me. My captaincy options did work last week, but Mo was also a spy to me. So, that was a little bit of a fruitless battle. Diaby's been a major disappointment for me. Really hasn't given me the kind of offensive numbers I was hoping for the price point. And, when you're rooting on a Luton striker to score for you, it's a really tough week. And it just didn't really help me in any way. Nothing from the defense, from a clean sheet standpoint, outside of the one assist from Pedro Porro. So really just a down week for me. Little attacking returns. Happy I captained Holland and I hung in there. I am, we'll scratch the record, break the presses. This is usually where we talk about our transfers. I have done something this week that I have not done all season long. And I had mentioned that I wouldn't do unless I believe would actually seriously impact my team in that existing match week and weeks to come. And I am taking my first hit of the season. I will be getting a -4. I had 2 free transfers and I have made 3 moves. I have gone with some of the chalk on this, following a little bit of the template, but more or less what the analytics say regarding what players are going to get minutes and, more importantly, what players have fixtures that could lead to really good outcomes in regard to points and increased ranking. And that was moving on from Anderson, I believe it was. Yeah, Anderson to Saliba, Fernandez down to Saka, and Bowen to Mbeumo. And I have another couple moves that I plan to make in there. I really do like the side. I feel like it projects to score more points in the immediate. I think it'll score more points in the long run as well. It also positions me to make a few different moves depending on what I want to do in match week 18. There's some that feel like that's the time to gamble, move Holland off for a few weeks. Others feel like you just stash him on the bench. It's 1 week, and that's what 80% of the game will do anyways. So that'll be a really interesting decision, and it'll be something that I have to decide really on how I want to build out that side and what I see the team doing moving forward. So that 4 points is a big 4-point hit. It's going to give me a considerable drop down in the overall standings. Probably, like I said, bring me outside of this top 400,000 that I creeped into. But I'm hoping for a really strong week this week that will lead me into this busy festive fixture period during December and get me ready for the second half stretch, which will be interesting as always because we have, the AFCON competition, the Asia Cup, as well as the international breaks, the League Cup coming back, the FA Cup getting introduced. So all kinds of fixtures, let alone when Europe and the knockout periods kick back in February. So lots of football to come. All the fantasy input will be right here at American Scouser TV. As always, please, if you are not already, go out to the YouTube channel, subscribe, go ahead and like, share it with your friends. If there's something you feel that we can change about the program or you would like to get involved, please send us a message through any of our social media sites. And as always, please interact with all the programming, whether it be the Monday night podcast, the Thursday night podcasts, our morning coffee or tea show, which are brought to you Monday, Wednesday, and Friday by our great sponsors, Reckless Coffee. Those shows are live as well. They are on Facebook, YouTube, and X, and they are on at 10 a.m. Eastern, Monday, Wednesday, Friday. So for everyone at American Scouser TV, I'm Gally. Thank you for watching the Premier League Fantasy Show, We will be back next week, and hopefully Matush will be here. We'll both be able to talk about 2 green arrows, or you'll all just be able to laugh about how this guy couldn't get anything right. Thanks, everyone, and have a great week.